In the second part of Intervention, Holmevik emphasizes Ulmer's point that electricity as an apparatus is the thing that is not yet invented, but instead is in the process of becoming. Therefore, as Jan states, inventing electricity means intervention and invention itself. Essentially, it is the act of hacking invention. Through play, we can accomplish this goal. We need to dissolve the binary separation of work and play and blur the definitions that we have traditionally assigned to these concepts. The two cease to be distinct ideas and instead become one. Play becomes work and work becomes play. Each becomes an intervention on the other. In the same sense, we need to banish the separation between what we call the real and what we call the virtual. In the digital age, how can such an opposition continue to make sense? Our lives are intricately intertwined in both worlds to a degree that it is no longer viable to maintain the distinction. In Holmevik's terms, we live in both worlds. We live a pervasive life. Perhaps the pervasive life first came into being with the intervention/invention of the digital spaces known as MOOs and MUDs. Born from hackers at play, these spaces built upon the open source programming construct and emerged as one of the earliest incarnations of what we have come to know as digital space. Inhabiting the digital spaces means a great deal more than simply arriving in an online space and interacting with it. The act of inhabiting these spaces also entailed building it. The code was not a hidden construct governing the behavior, but rather the code was on the surface, calling out for creative hacking and intervention. These modifications rarely took the form of predetermined goals or agendas. The nature of the Moo and Mud spaces were that people did with them whatever they found to be useful, and if the space did not have the ability to be useful, users were welcome to hack them. These were acts of pure play. They were acts committed for the sake of fun. As described earlier in the book, the hacker development model, if we want to insist that such a thing exists, and I'm not sure that we do, is based on progressively building and inventing. One crew comes in and builds a few stories and then departs. A new crew arrives and builds on what they find in their own vision and for their own purposes. The process is always in play. As Moos and Muds evolved, it eventually became clear that they could be useful in pedagogy. They facilitated the learning process by engaging and inviting students to intervene in their own educational environment. Instead of being detached from the learning space, students could actively build a space that suited their own personal, unique needs. Through these kinds of open source development projects, both students and educators alike adopted the identities of hackers/players. The commercial model of production was circumvented. Passive consumption was erased. Instead, active interventions became the mode of play that allowed new technologies to emerge in a way that was electric. They were inventions of play. Ludic ethics attempts to challenge the traditional notion that ethics and morality are hopelessly connected. Holmevik draws on Sikart, who defines ethics as a system or set of moral values and the tools for analyzing these values. Where Sikart goes astray, according to Holmevik, is when he defines morals as the right or wrong of actions or objects. By maintaining such a distinction, we are seeking a moral center that does not exist. We adopt negative ethics that are essentially grounded in the closure or the death of play. Through the act of seeking this death, we participate in destruction. It is a destruction that becomes paradoxical. As we seek the moral center, we find ourselves adopting the unethical position. In an electric understanding of ethics, these distinctions are abandoned. Electricity invokes the Nietzschean ideal that play cannot be reduced to such terms. It is always already outside and beyond the reach of such definitions. It is beyond good and evil. By recognizing this, we can escape laying the blame on play for atrocities like Columbine and the Colorado movie theater massacre. We fall prey to epideictic rhetoric. That is, a rhetoric of praise and blame, but all too often in the case of video games, it is just blame. A video game may be infused with certain kinds of ethics from its creators, but what is far more important is the charge inherent in the player. It is this charge that holds the power in the act of play. Holmevik seeks to unseat the cause, effect, and epideictic perspective that leads us to believe that games can have a causal effect in influencing the actions of their players. Are violent video games the cause of massacres like those previously mentioned? The answer is no, and Holmevik once again turns to our good friend Greg Ulmer in an attempt to tell us why. Ulmer, in turn, looks to Nietzsche and Heidegger's attempt to disrupt and abandon traditional true/false and right/wrong binaries that are grounded in classical and traditional notions of literacy. Ulmer attempts to undo these concepts through his conception of Heidegger's the moment. For Ulmer, the moment is Heidegger's version of the withdrawing opening chora required to keep life at play, end quote. The moment then becomes something akin to the crossroads for Miami virtue. It is that place where the third axis, the ludic transversal, the pleasure-pain axis, intersects with the other two. Therefore, instead of approaching game studies armed with a predetermined set of ethics based on socially constructed ideals of right and wrong, we need to approach such scholarship from the electorate perspective, and see ethics as emerging from the act of invention through the lived virtue of play. As Holmevik nicely sums up, quote, as a correlative, we are inventing new ethics through the act of ethics, through playing, where experiencing outcomes and consequences is the key element. This is not about establishing a universal ethics, but microethics applied individually, end quote. That, in a nutshell, is how ludic ethics can be described to work. By dissolving the boundaries and constraints that accompany the binary opposition between work and play, real and virtual, right and wrong, we can then free ourselves to pursue a much grander goal. Through play, and serious play at that, we can hope to, as Steve Jobs put it, make a dent in the universe. And making that dent in the universe is precisely what we must do. In recalling Ulmer's story, many of our mommies and daddies in the institution still resist acknowledging the value in our work. We must prove to them that through the electorate apparatus, we do have the ability to change the world in significant ways for the better, and it is our solemn responsibility to do so.